Colton Henderson closed his laptop and surveyed his dreary motel room. Double twin beds, coffee maker with horrible coffee, desk. Nothing special, but this was a quick stop. One night, and he'd finally be on his way to Texas. Just when he thought he'd completed his last mission for the U.S. Army Special Forces, tonight he had a meeting with an old friend and former mentor, and had already been informed a big ask would be forthcoming. The whole cloak and dagger feel had him wondering what would come next. No phone calls discussing the subject were allowed, as if interceptions were suspected. They were to meet in person, and there would be an exchange, should Colton agree. Many soldiers eased into civilian life by taking dangerous, high-paying work all over the world. But Colton hadn't done anything like this. He understood he could make a lot of money, but he wasn't interested. Trouble of any kind was behind him. Unfortunately, no matter what would be asked of Colton, it would have to fit around Sean and Bonnie Lee's wedding. He just emailed his brother tonight to let him know he would be there, and there was no way he would miss it. Colton had been gone too long from his small town, and even if he wondered whether he'd still recognize Henderson Grange, he remembered his ranch. Hill country was a postcard that lived in his mind. Large stretches of flat land with the occasional hills dotting the landscape, filled with wildflowers and tall grass. Lupin Lake, where he and his brothers had learned to swim. The longhorns, cattle, and fields were waiting for him. His brothers were waiting for him. It was past time to go home. Even so, he'd agreed to this meeting out of respect for the man who'd asked. The Smoky Casino in Winnemucca, Nevada was pretty much what he'd expected of the small mining town between Utah and California. He found Horace Walker waiting for him at a red vinyl booth with a Formica-covered table in the restaurant tucked near the back, past the gambling tables and slot machines. Even out of uniform, even in his own country, now officially a civilian, Colton hesitated a second before he sat. This was still a whole new world he'd entered. One in which he didn't always need to have his guard up. There were fewer rules, less violence, less breaches of decorum. It would take some time getting used to all this. "At ease," said his former superior, as though he understood Colton's dilemma far too well. Colton took a seat across from him, and when the waitress came by, he ordered a coffee. "Are you getting settled?" Horace asked. Polite conversation, and Colton recognized it. He just wasn't accustomed to this new world. He wanted orders, the request, so he could get this over with. He wanted to see whether or not he could work this big ask around his brother's wedding, but more than likely he wanted to tactfully let his friend down easy and explain that his fighting days were behind him. He'd been lucky, too lucky, and like a gambler who won big at the blackjack table, he planned to cut out and take his winnings home.